Well, today marks a deadline given to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to respond to more than 24 Liberal MPs calling for him to step aside.
Get away from that inner circle. Talk to your friends. Talk to your colleagues and really get a good read of the country and do the right thing.
Trudeau has been resolute. It's unclear, though, if he will respond today to those caucus members or what that could look like. There's also another looming deadline for him. The Bloc Québécois gave him until tomorrow to pass 2 pieces of legislation or face the possibility of an early election. Joining me now to discuss is Scott Reid. He's our CTV News political commentator. Scott, good Monday morning to you. So Trudeau has said a number of times that he will stay. Could anything change his mind?
Well, something could change his mind over time, I suppose, but nothing's going to change his mind today. You know, this deadline that so-called dissident MPs have set out for him, move today to leave or else. I don't think there is an or else. So I wouldn't look for high drama at the end of the day. The truth of the matter is this group of MPs is sort of decentralized, somewhat disorganized. There is no motivating candidate that they're circling around. There's no it's not a coup. It's really just an expression of frustration and resignation. So I'm not certain why they set a deadline, but I am quite certain that they do not have a punch to throw at the end of the day.
So what does the Prime Minister do? Ignore their calls, sit down with them once again and explain why he's staying? What do you think he'll do?
Well, he's crystal clear about what he's going to do. He's not going to leave, and he's not going to pay them a lot more mind. I think what you're going to hear from the Prime Minister and those around him is, listen, we give them their opportunity to voice their opinion. It's time to turn the page now. And then quietly, what you'll continue to see over time is when the dissidents speak up, they'll start to try to reverse the onus and say, actually, the barrier to re-election is becoming internal dissension. Those people who are speaking out are harming the party's chances of re-election. Frankly, it's a little bit rich, given that the Prime Minister has taken the party to a 22-point deficit in the polls. But that's how this is going to unfold. The fundamental question really is going to be, how does the Prime Minister reconcile these deep deficits in the polls? How does he deal with the fact that he's trailing in every part of the country and in every demographic? How does he deal with what will be a sustained and permanent truth that large chunks of his caucus wish that he would leave and not compete in the next election? So I don't think he'll be felled by any of that today, but over time, that is going to weigh on him. Over time, the prospect that his last campaign could end, not just in defeat, but possibly in a truly humbling defeat, a very bad outcome. It's that sort of factor that probably and possibly may weigh on his mind and encourage him at some point to consider leaving.
So to be clear then, Scott, is it him or is it the party that Canadians are giving such low approval ratings for?
There's an answer to that in the polling data, and it's pretty crystal clear. Obviously, after 10 years, people are tired of the government. But if you're talking about the straw that stirs the drink, it has become the Prime Minister's personal numbers are a drag on the party. Speculative polling is always tough to understand and appreciate, but there are speculative polls that have been done that suggest that if the Prime Minister left, the floor and the voter cohort available to the Liberal Party would increase. So I think that most observers would say the truth is the Prime Minister himself has become a barrier, perhaps a significant one, to re-election.
And then lastly, the Bloc Québécois giving him until tomorrow to pass those 2 pieces of legislation. Where do you see that going?
That, I think, is interesting. I mean, pull out the magic 8 ball. It's a little hazy. I think, there's a couple of things that could happen. We're not going to see both pieces of quote-unquote legislation occur. Could there be some movement around OAS? Might they be doing some shuttle diplomacy around, can we do some targeted increased relief for people who have lower incomes? Maybe. Will that satisfy the Bloc? Hard to know. And when it comes to supply management, I do think there's options available to the government. I do think that they could find compromise. I think, to be honest with you, if instead of a bill that's stuck in the Senate that's not government sponsored, if the government were to come forward with a motion or legislation in the House that said that it wanted to test the House on and pass legislation on that issue alone, you could see some momentum around that and possibly attract the support of the Bloc. But here, I'll rush to the finish line. Marcia, in my view, if you're the government, you want to keep the Bloc as pleased as possible. But ultimately, the NDP is going to permit this government to continue on until 2025 until we get past Christmas, we get into the new year, we get into the spring. I mean, really, they're going to be the rubber for this government and not the Bloc.
Scott Reid for us this morning. Scott, thanks for all that. Scott is our CTV News political commentator.